after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, there was, of course, all this controversy about, do you lower the flags for him? Do you not lower the flags? President Donald Trump said we were lowering the flags. And even Washington Governor Bob Ferguson, who I am clearly not the biggest fan of, said, yeah, we're going to lower the flags in concert with the president's order and with the remembrance of September 11th, although I was slightly annoyed because he generalized it to be not just for Charlie Kirk, but for all victims of political violence, which I felt like was his way to couch it and make it palatable to Democrats. But then there was this big controversy that went nationwide, and certainly the Kent, Washington school district wasn't the only school district where this happened. But in Kent, Washington, the superintendent of public schools put out this statement saying, we're not lowering the flags for Charlie Kirk, essentially. And it was this very sanctimonious, as educators and public servants, we believe symbolic acts such as lowering the flag should reflect the principles we work to instill in our students and community. When a person has made public statements that conflict with the values of inclusivity, respect, and student safety that we as a district strive to uphold, we may choose not to fly the flag at half-staff. And that was a statement from Israel Vela, who is the superintendent of Kent schools. And as I said at the time, not only is it very sanctimonious, but you're essentially saying that conservatives or anyone who supported Charlie Kirk or what he stood for, or really Christians for that matter, that they don't represent the values of a public school district, that respecting and appreciating them as members of your community is not in line with the values of inclusivity, respect, and student safety. So someone like Charlie Kirk, who's a Christian, was a Christian conservative, student safety, that he somehow doesn't reflect, or people who support him make students feel less safe. It was just this wild thing to me, because here you're paid with taxpayer funds to be a superintendent for a school district that, yes, is in a very blue part of the country and a very blue part of the state, but certainly isn't a monolith. So now as one person, as a superintendent, you're making this decision that essentially conservatives don't belong, that your values and the values of an entire school district don't line up with conservatives, which is insane. So after that controversy, the first school board meeting since that controversy, was last night. And I'm not particularly surprised by any of this, but I think what struck me in watching the whole thing, and we're going to play quite a few clips, and yes, you're going to have to listen to some unhinged leftists who don't believe that Charlie Kirk was a good human being, but I think it's important to play some of that. But I think what struck me is it almost evolved into this debate over whether conservatives are even equal human beings to the rest of them, deserving of equal respect. And I just was like, I can't even believe we're having this conversation, and so much of it, and this is what's really shocking and hard to grasp, so much of it comes from the marginalized groups. It's almost like it's like retribution. The groups of people who have actually, at periods in our country's history, been othered, been marginalized, been considered less than, know what it's like to go through that. They're the first ones to do it to another group. They're the first ones to do it to other people. You see it so much, and not a monolith, but from the Black community, with activists who, oh my gosh, we're going to turn around and all these wrongs done to our country, so we're going to do those wrongs to other people. And again, not a monolith, but you see it from the alphabet mob types, the radical gender. Oh my gosh, I feel othered as a transgender person or a gay person, so now I'm going to other you. It is like a retribution thing, and it was horrifying to watch this. So I'm going to play a couple cuts from people who were there in support of the Kent School Board, well, not even the Kent School Board, of the Kent Superintendent's decision not to lower the flag for Charlie Kirk. There was really two groups of people. I could take all of the commenters who were in support of the school board's decision, and I can divide them into two groups. Anyone want to guess what those two groups are? Well, I'm sure you're shouting at your screen. You know exactly the two groups I'm talking about. One of them was the older, geriatric, white progressive who has to prove that they're smarter than, better than, more woke than anyone else.
While volunteering at Kent Lake High School, I witnessed the diversity of students, staff, and families. Don't know if the other speakers did. What I saw in each school were very caring and welcoming educators, staff, and families. I never saw behavior at any school which would indicate that Kent School District should have honored a person known for encouraging racism, misogyny, and homophobia.
I recognize the kind of person that Charlie Kirk was, the statements that he made against women's rights, against my community, the LGBTQ community, and just a whole slew of absolutely, in my opinion, horrendous statements. And I deplore the efforts of the current administration to kind of turn him into a saint. Flying the flags at half-staff should be done for national heroes, not for somebody like Charlie Kirk.
In your opinion. But it's this, and it's the most sanctimonious group. Those older white progressives, we talk about them all the time, that feel like they have to prove in some way that they are like more righteous than the rest of us. He goes, I recognize who Charlie Kirk really was. And if you don't, you're just a stupid moron. And the woman before that talking about waxing on and about the inclusivity and the equity that she saw as a volunteer at schools in this very diverse community. Except we're not going to welcome conservatives and Charlie Kirk, and he's an evil, horrible human being. Insufferable. Perhaps even more insufferable than that, but not quite, because I just think they're in a category of their own of insufferable. So I said two categories. The white, woke, older conservative, and then the activist teachers. It was concerning to me how many of the speakers who showed up and believe it's an actual legitimate argument that the schools should not be honoring essentially someone with conservative views. Shocking to me how many of them were teachers. I mean, is it shocking? Probably not. That this is really if you're sending your child to a public school, imagine, I'm going to play this in a moment, they're both black. Imagine that one of these two, that you're a white parent and you're sending a white kid to school, and you're a conservative parent. Imagine for a moment that one of these two are your kid's teacher. Listen.
In the end, this is not about convincing everyone. It is about standing firm with those who know this truth and affirming that our future will be built on inclusion, acceptance, and belonging, not just for the dominant culture, but for all.
Right now in our country, I think we're at a very critical point, and what we do is going to provide a important example to our young people and really set the tone for their future. And originally, I actually want to start in a bit more of a dramatic fashion and quote Charlie Kirk. However, as I read on, many of his quotes were racist, homophobic, transphobic, degrading, inflammatory, and actively promoted harm, which would violate your rules and standards of civility, I'd reckon. So instead, I would like to invite you to reject the idea of lowering the flag at half-mast or doing any kind of honorific or formal recognition of that individual or his ilk.
That individual or his ilk. Can't honor that individual or his ilk. Made my skin crawl. If I were, frankly, and yes, I'll make it about, well, if I were a white or sane parent in the school district where that guy teaches, they would have been out immediately. Can't honor him or his ilk. And you heard the first woman say, we need to build a future that essentially isn't just about the dominant culture. And so the way we do that is what? Shaming white people, shaming conservatives, shaming Christians, making them feel other. And again, coming from a black woman who started her speech by talking about essentially how she was part of a group of people treated as less than. And so now we're going to treat white Christian conservatives as less than. And these are the people educating our kids. It's insane. So there were a lot of speakers, there who were upset with the Kent School District and the superintendent for this decision, and echoed really what, we had said on the show. And I think one of the biggest frustrations is basically you talk about equity and inclusion for everyone except people who look like us and think like us. Here's the clip.
I've heard many people call Charlie Kirk racist, fascist, homophobic, and more. He was anything but. He gave a voice to those who disagreed with him. Exactly what you guys are taking away. I encourage anyone who actually thinks he was these things to actually watch full videos of his campus visits, podcasts, and debates. He was a very religious man who left behind a wife and 2 small children. The hate directed at him and those who agreed with him has been horrific. So I personally have been called a racist, a Nazi, and all that from people that I know, that I no longer have as friends, just because I agreed with him. This district claims to stand for equity, diversity, and inclusion, all the big buzzwords. So it's been shown that it stands for the exact opposite. He excluded every conservative, neutral person, and any other person who doesn't think like him.
Yeah. And the whole race argument that this is all white, bad, blah, 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 really went out the window pretty quick because there were non-white people who showed up at the school board meeting to tell the school board that they didn't agree with the decision that had been made, including, I thought, one of the best speeches was given by this guy, not white. I think he was, Hawaiian, but also Asian. I can't remember which country he said he had one of his parents from. And he gave a very impassioned speech. Here's part of it.
Where is the equity for people who are conservative in your district? Now I have a dilemma. Do I send my son to a school system that blatantly refuses to have respect for the people who I agree with? People that I want my son to be modeled after? Do I send him to a place where the ideas that I want to impress on him are going to be ignored and oppressed and then dressed up as hate speech? As a conservative in Washington, I've had to be careful of what I have to say about my beliefs in fear of becoming a pariah. I have never been one to speak up in the public square, but I can no longer be silent. I can no longer sit and watch the world turn into a place that will not be the most fertile environment for my son to become a young man.
I think that dad is thinking what a lot of parents are thinking. Gosh, am I going to send, and here's a native Hawaiian, I can't remember if it was also the Philippines, maybe it was, moved to Washington, wanted to build a better life here with my family. I'm a conservative. I feel like I can't even talk about being a conservative. And now I'm thinking about sending my son, who would start in a couple years, to a school district that clearly has contempt for my conservative values. So what are they going to instill in my child? Are they going to teach my child that he's a bad person, make them believe that he's a bad person? And again, I go back to the man who assassinated Charlie Kirk. He grew up in a conservative home. All of a sudden, he goes to school and he's radicalized to the point where he assassinates someone because of their conservative beliefs. So I think that dad is asking exactly the right question. What do I do in a dilemma like this? And I say it a million times. I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to preach to parents about, just take your kid out of school. I understand it's not that easy, and we do collectively have an obligation to try to yank it out root and stem. These racist ideas that are being pushed in our school system on kids to make white kids feel bad, to make conservatives feel bad. And I talk about it all the time is the media. The media is one of the biggest offenders here. Because anything in the media, not just this issue, anything, conservative comes in automatically bad. And they have to almost prove that they're good people. It's like how the news media portrays them. Automatically the wrong opinion, and we're going to make them fight and scratch and prove that their opinions and their beliefs are valid. And then liberals and progressives, they come in, it's automatically like, they're great people. They care about others. And they have to, they'd have to do something pretty bad to be painted with the brushstrokes that conservatives are painted with, just for existing, just for having views. It's wild. So, that conversation went back and forth at the school board meeting. Charlie Kirk bad, Charlie Kirk was good, conservatives bad, conservatives good. But if you're not interested in sort of hashing out that conversation, I actually think a more productive use of the school board meeting would have been to understand how this decision could be made by one person for an entire public school district. You've got an order from the president, an order from the governor. Why did one person, albeit the superintendent, feel that it was within his power And it was correct for him individually to make a decision to say, we're not going to do this because it's not in line with our values. And there was this other woman who spoke who was great. And that's what she focused on and called out the superintendent, who, by the way, was present.
It's the fact that this decision ignored orders from both a Republican president and a Democrat governor. This wasn't a partisan issue. It was about basic respect. And it wasn't a decision made together. Our superintendent made this call without input from his staff, without input from the school board, and without input from the families he's supposed to serve. That's radical leadership, one person imposing their will on an entire community. And that's not representative of democracy. Democracy means listening, it means consensus, and it means accountability. The truth is, this is an 80-20 issue. The vast majority of people, regardless of their politics, no matter what they believe that our country, when our country calls for respect, we show it. Lowering a flag isn't about who you voted for. It's a cultural act. It's how we honor loss and how we show compassion and how we teach our kids that every life has value. When we say a life shouldn't be honored just because we didn't agree with someone, we diminish the value of life itself. That's a slippery slope. That's a vigilante mindset. You don't have to like Charlie Kirk, and you don't even have to agree with him, but he was a victim of political violence.
Yeah, but maybe that's what they're trying to do. I mean, again, they're sending these kids to school, and they're basically emerging activists. And so she says, you're showing that, life doesn't have value if you feel a certain way. Sometimes I think they want them to leave believing that certain lives don't have value or don't have as much value or are bad inherently. But she makes a good point, is like, was clearly going to be a very divisive thing for the community. So why would this superintendent out on his own make the decision? And in that initial statement, it didn't even say, Superintendent Israel Vela. It said Kent School District, and had this statement about our values. So he didn't even attribute it to himself. And I thought, well, gosh, he sat through this whole meeting, had all these people speak, conservatives speak, feeling like, wow, you're not including us. We're not being treated equitably. And so I thought, okay, maybe he'll have a come to Jesus moment and realize that this was the wrong thing to do, if not for the obvious reason that you're, claiming an entire community shares your beliefs, but because you didn't consult anyone. Well, if you thought that, you're wrong, because after hearing all of that, he had no apology and instead acted like what he did was correct and righteous.
My decision regarding the recent flag protocol was indeed grounded in Kent School District's core values of equity, excellence, and community. Understanding the importance of communication and support, I recognized this decision prompted a range of responses that were both positive and negative. I remain committed to fostering a respectful and inclusive environment for all members of our school community as I continue to serve our students and families with integrity, as I've done for the past 25 years.
Yeah, no introspection. And he wasn't even listening. His ears were closed that entire time. For him to say, again, repeat that this is consistent with our values and in keeping with communication, good communication. You didn't communicate it to anybody. In fact, the school board took much of the heat over the decision when they didn't even make it. And then again, I made this decision and I'm full of integrity and all these good things. He didn't listen to what a single person who came in there to speak had to say. Very obvious. Now, I want to give one of these school board members credit. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're all liberals on the school board. Maybe except for one. Yeah, except for one, I think they're all pretty liberal, including the vice president of the school board, Donald Cook. So he, after the public comment, they had opportunities to sort of speak to what was going on. And even not agreeing with Charlie Kirk and not sharing his political beliefs, I thought out of everything that was said, he had a very reasoned, rational, not only reflection on the situation, but actually offered a path forward. So I don't know, this doesn't happen again. Here he is.
We should be making decisions to bring our community together. We should not be making decisions that drive us apart. And I may disagree wholeheartedly, and I do, with what Charlie Kirk said while he was alive. The respect for the dead, to me, is important. And it does not mean that I say that what they did was correct in their life, but it does mean that I say their life was not worth being snuffed out because of their words, no matter how abhorrent they may be to someone, that shouldn't come into play, in my opinion. And it does not mean that, us doing that agrees with it. And I think our governor provided a way for us to go forward in a way that would make it so that we're not at each other's throats over something like this. And granted, not everyone agreed with that, and that's okay too. Part of being an American here, at least as far as I understand it, is being able to debate things. And when you take that away from your elected representatives here, I feel that's wrong. And I really do believe in democracy. I believe that having all 5 of us weigh in would have avoided this controversy. Do I know that it would have ended up in a different way? I don't. But at least then your representatives, our community's representatives, would be making that choice. And I think if we can do nothing but just say, if there's a directive from our governor, that we are going to honor that directive unless the board says otherwise.
Sane, productive, rational. Is that so hard? It's like, oh, hey, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. It's not enough for us to all get around. I mean, we want to hear from people and all that, but what do we do moving forward? I also think, and I don't know anything else about Vice President of the school board, Donald Cook. He might have said and done things that I disagree with. I have no idea. I've just seen this clip of him, to be frank. But it's also someone saying, put that tough decision on me. I want to be part of debating that tough decision, even if I know at the end of the day, I might come to a conclusion and we might vote and, I'll be on the record saying something that, a bunch of my constituents don't agree with, because there was a ton of backlash over this decision. And so I think it says something for a school board member who says, hey, I know there's going to be backlash no matter what, but I'm okay with that. And I'm going to, I want to have a say in it. So I appreciate what he said. What do you do going forward? I think you have to take out this kind of individual sort of decision making in a school environment that would lead to concerns about, bias and unfair treatment. And as he said, the governor, the president and the governor, 2 people who do not like each other, both said flags at half-staff. And they gave you cover just to say, hey, whenever the governor says flags at half-staff, we're just going to do it. And if you have a problem with it, take it up with the governor. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the president. But that's the only way we can assure that we're being fair and equitable and we're not bringing our personal political beliefs into the equation. But I think if there's one thing I take away, it's how much so many of these educators genuinely hate conservatives. They actually hate, I hate using that word, hate. I think they dislike white people, even some of the white educators. And they think inherently you are a hateful human being if you are white, and especially if you're conservative, and especially if you're Christian. And we have a ton of stories on the show today talking about the state of our education system and how much they're focused on these divisive issues. Pushing radical gender ideology, pushing identitarianism. So we'll get to all of that. But gosh, I'm concerned about what's happening behind closed doors in our public schools in Washington state after watching that meeting. And the superintendent, you should lose your job. No introspection, no ability to be humble, no ability to listen to your constituents and the parents who are sending their kids to your school. And you just think that you're right and everyone else is wrong and we all have to share values with you. Ridiculous.